Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Todd Klindt's SharePoint Netcast number 177, recorded live Monday, November 11th, 2013. I'm, of course, your host, Todd Klindt, and I'll be running the show tonight. So if you have any questions, concerns, or anything, raise your hand. I'll call out. I'll hook you up. But I'm the guy in charge tonight. We'll see. We'll see how that goes. I might be the one in charge, but I couldn't do this without the love and tender support of the fine folks at Rackspace. They're very nurturing of me and my Netcast, so I'd like to publicly thank them for that. You can find out about all the crazy stuff they do for SharePoint folks at sharepoint.rackspace.com. And because we'll say that they did it all for you guys, because I tell them that I pimp that URL to all of my Netcast hooligans every Monday night, and then the people that download it. And so now, starting late this afternoon, it now has a fancier mobile view. So if you go to it with your computer, because you can get the internet on computer these days, you can go to it on your computer and it looks fancy and big and all that. But if you go to it on a tablet or a phone, you can get a phone or a tablet version. So if you have an Android phone or whatever, or an iPhone, it squeezes it down and gives you a little thing. Using that whole design manager bit that SharePoint 2013 likes to have. So go with your phone, your tablet, whatever. Go out to sharepoint.rackspace.com. If you have any problems, like for instance, if you have a Lumia 920 and it doesn't exactly work, doesn't look right, let one of us know. Shoot me an email, send me a tweet or whatever. I know they're tweaking it a bunch right now, so they'll have feedback. But it is mobile view. We are eating our own dog food. It's all hosted on SharePoint 2013, and we're using all that SharePoint 2013 goodness. So on to the production notes. Not a lot of production notes to talk about. Had a couple little hiccups last week with the audio and the video, but that smoothed out pretty well. I fixed it all in post. That's an industry thing, but I fixed it all in post. And so that went over pretty smooth. But as I was preparing for tonight, I realized that I had forgotten to blog 176. So last week's is on the RSS feed, but just not on my blog. I forgot that. So I struggle a little bit with that, and this is kind of some production stuff that you probably don't care about. But when it comes to blogging things, if I look at the analytics on my blog, it's very obvious. I have a bunch of views Monday through Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday it's dead, and then Monday is. So I try to time blog posts correctly so that they show up on weekdays when people see them. What I don't want to do is blog something really exciting Friday night and then blog a Netcast Saturday and blog something dumb Sunday, so that Monday when people come in, the important blog post is down at the bottom. I try really hard not to do that, and so I think I probably was going to blog 176 and then forgot, and the weekend came and all that. But so that's out there, but I will get that out there. Something, teasing you a little bit, whetting your appetite for more Netcast stuff. And none of you guys in the chat room told me I forgot to change my slide, so don't let that happen again. Okay, so that's for the production notes, but otherwise, sound's been pretty good. It's all going well. So we got that. On to the topics. Now, something that I have been just been bursting at the seams about lately is I finally my big blog post at the Hey Scripting Guy blog came out last week, or came out on Saturday. So I'm not a big enough deal to make a Hey Scripting Guy post during the week, but that's all cool. I'll take whatever it'll give me. So if you're not familiar with the Hey Scripting Guy blog, that has been around forever, since like 98, 99, the year 2000, something like that. And it's been a place that IT pros have been going for Visual Basic scripts and command prompt scripts and now PowerShell scripts forever. It's kind of the authoritative place. And I got hooked up with those guys last year when I was on the Power Scripting Live podcast. They are loosely affiliated with that, Ed and Teresa Wilson. And they were just salt of the earth people, great people. Stayed in touch with them, hung out with them at conferences and things like that, tech eds and those kind of things. And so Ed had graciously told me if I ever had anything that that I wanted him to consider publishing, to let him take a look at it, and he'd consider putting it on the Hey Scripting Guy blog. So I did that, and I had a blog post about using PowerShell to schedule tasks, schedule PowerShell tasks. In previous versions of PowerShell, if you wanted to schedule a PowerShell script, it was ugly because you had to like schedule a command prompt thing that fired up PowerShell that then fired up your PowerShell script. It was several steps. With PowerShell 3 now, all that's built into PowerShell. So this Hey Scripting Guy blog post is how to schedule PowerShell scripts in PowerShell. And it's something that comes up all the time. People have asked me about that. And so I finally just got around to blogging it, and I got it all written up, and I'm like, you know what? This is cool, and I should blog this. Wait, this might actually be cool enough to make it to the Hey Scripting Guy blog. So I sent it to Ed. He loved it, and so that finally got out. But I submitted it to him probably 3 weeks ago, maybe, and I've had to wait. It's been killing me. I'm all very excited. So go out there, and I'll try to for a little bit. Well, let's go out and check right now. You can leave comments on there, so go ahead and leave some comments if you like the stuff. That way, the next time I submit something to Ed, he knows that I actually have people that like my stuff. Some folks in the chat room are saying mean things about me. For those of you that just download this, you miss some of the fun and frivolity, but some of the questionable content that happens in the chat room. Becky Isserman in the chat room, I would normally consider Becky a friend, but she's saying that this PowerShell stuff is going to lead me into Visual Studio, and that I'm going to become a developer. Now, I don't know why she would say something like that. Becky and I go way back. We've been friends for years, and now she's saying that I'm going to become a developer. Hurts my heart, Becky. Right there in the big one. But if you don't already go to the Hey Scripting Guy blog, go on out there. There's a bunch of SharePoint stuff out there. I know John Ferringer's had stuff out there. Brian Jackett's had stuff out there. So by all means, leave comments and things like that so that Ed knows that the PowerShell stuff is, the SharePoint stuff is stuff that we want to see. All right, so that was good. I had to put that one on the top of the list. I was just so very excited that one got published. Very excited. So the next topic is one that I've been asked about a bunch of times, and I've just not felt qualified to talk about it. But it's come up a couple of times with customers and things like that, and so I kind of feel like now's the time that I'm going to talk about it. And that is the distributed cache service. So let's put that out there. Got a link in the old chat room so those guys can follow along as I read aloud. So the distributed cache service is something that is new in SharePoint 2013. And it is, so because it's new and because it's complicated, it's kind of scary. And so I thought I would spend a couple of minutes talking about this, what it is and how it can go wrong, and just kind of some gotchas. Not that I want you to walk away from this with an exhaustive understanding of it, but what I want to do is just kind of gently ring some of the little bells that you need to know about, so that down the road, if you have problems, you're probably not going to know exactly what the fix is, but you'll at least understand the terminology enough to be able to find the fix, something like that. So, but again, in no way, shape, or form do I consider myself a distributed cache expert, but here we go. So first, what is the distributed cache? The distributed cache is something that was introduced in SharePoint 2013 to help with problems of scale that SharePoint 2010 had. So one example is in SharePoint 2010, the user profile service had a profile database and a social database and then the sync database, but nobody cares about that. And the profile database stored information about the users and all that. The sync database stored the social database stored the social pieces of SharePoint. And so in SharePoint 2010, it was possible for a user to do social things, tag documents, that kind of stuff, but not have a My Site because they were stored in different places. But what Microsoft found with SharePoint 2010 is that social database became a bottleneck. an I/O bottleneck for environments with lots of social information and lots of users. So for SharePoint 2013, they broke that social piece out of the social database, and they stored it in each user's My Site site collection. And so now, for instance, you can't have social stuff but not a My Site because you need the My Site to store the social stuff. So now social information, news feeds, tagging, comments, all that kind of stuff is not stored in one database. It's stored in multiple content databases if you have multiple content databases. So that was great for the bottleneck, because there's not one disk that's the bottleneck now. But now the problem is it's not all in one spot. So now if you want to surface that information, how do you do it? Because you got to do all these reads and all that. So the distributed cache service is one way that they're doing that. But essentially, it is just a way to manage scale. It was a way for SharePoint to go that next level up and grow that next level out in using the distributed cache. So that's what it is and where it came from. What uses it? So there are three main areas of SharePoint 2013 that use the distributed cache service. The first one is search. Search does a bunch of things in the background. A lot of things now in SharePoint 2013 are driven by search, things you wouldn't necessarily think of being driven by search. And so search stores some of that information in the distributed cache so that when things or people query those bits, it can pull it out of the distributed cache as opposed to having to do the query, pull it out of the databases and all that kind of stuff. So search uses it. By proxy, the social pieces of SharePoint, news feeds and things like that, use the distributed cache because they are part of search. So think about your news feed is really a search query that says, show me the news feed items from all the people that I'm following. I mean, that's essentially what it is as a query. So social uses the distributed cache as well. And when people make changes to the news feed, things like that, all get put in the distributed cache and stored on different servers. The other final bit is authentication. So the distributed cache holds authentication tokens, things like that. And so you don't end up getting popped for authentication as things move between servers, things like that. So those are the pieces of SharePoint 2013 that use the distributed cache. And kind of the takeaway from this particular point is the underpinnings of SharePoint require distributed cache. So what you can't do is just say, wow, this distributed cache thing is just way too hard. I'm just going to shut it all off. I'm not going to use it. Whatever the pieces are that need this, I'm just not going to use them. You can't get away with that. Authentication, sort of important to SharePoint, and also the search stuff and things like that. So that's why you need it, because all these important pieces. And it's one of those things that can be a lot of work, but it's worth it. You just got to have it. So under the hood, what is it? SharePoint has done a great job in the last couple of versions, 2010 and 2013, of finding pieces of SharePoint that do something and then finding another Microsoft product that already do that and bolting them in. The most famous or infamous example of that is User Profile Service, but we've also got Workflow and Office Web Apps now in SharePoint 2013. So the distributed cache is another one of those examples where the SharePoint team said we're going to let some other team handle writing this. We're just going to bolt into the interface. And the distributed cache is a Windows feature called, or not a Windows feature, but a piece of software called App Fabric. And App Fabric outside of SharePoint does a couple of different things, but SharePoint only uses the caching feature. So there's some execution pieces too that the App Fabric does. SharePoint doesn't need those, some more workflow type stuff. But we're only using the caching portion of App Fabric. And that is installed with a prereq installer. So don't be a hero and try to download this all yourself and configure it. Just run the prereq installer that installs the correct version of App Fabric, configures it just so. So you don't want to try to do that on your own. SharePoint knows best. Just let SharePoint do it. The other thing about that is when this installs, you'll see these App Fabric tools show up. You'll see, for Windows 2012 on the start screen there, you'll see some App Fabric-y things. And if you go into your full thing, you'll see them. Don't touch them. Woe is the IT administrator or the SharePoint administrator that goes in and tries to fiddle with the with the distributed cache with the App Fabric tools. It is pretty hairy. So don't do that. Just pretend they're not there. If you need to, put tape on your monitor where they show up, things like that. In all honesty, when I build my test VMs, so there's like 2 or 3 icons, that the Fabric ones that show up. I right click on them and just tell them not to pin to start, because I just don't want to accidentally click them. I don't want to touch them. It's all very bad. And the other thing is, since Fabric is just part of Windows, well, part of the Microsoft stack, there are a bunch of other products that use it, or other developers that develop against it. Don't leverage SharePoint's Fabric instance, the one that it's using for the distributed cache. Don't leverage it for anything else. SharePoint is very jealous, and it doesn't like to share. And if you try to bolt your code into the existing Fabric, the distributed cache, it will explode in your face. SharePoint will burn your house down and steal your car. So don't do that. If you have an app that happens to be running on a SharePoint server that also needs Fabric, you're going to have to run Fabric on another box somewhere and leverage that. It just will not work very well. Becky in the chat room is saying Fabric does not sound like a whole lot of fun. Absolutely not. Not even close. So, and then kind of just wanted to say, how does it work? Essentially, one or more servers have a large chunk of RAM that is set aside for distributed cache and distributed cache overhead. And basically, it's kind of like the transaction logs for SQL. It's a very fast place for SharePoint to write things and read things, though, without having to worry about getting it on a disk right away, things like that. So, I mean, we're talking gigs of RAM, and so that's where it holds all these things, and it's just cache. And then as it has time, it trickle writes things out to databases and things like that. So now here's just kind of some things to know about the distributed cache, and there's some pain points and things like that, things that you're potentially going to do wrong. I just wanted to talk about some of those. So when you install SharePoint on a server, the installer looks at how much RAM the box has at the time and says, okay, I get 10% of that. And I'm going to take half of that 10%, and I'm going to use that for cache, and I'm going to take the other half of that 10%, and I'm going to use it for management, for running myself. But understanding that if the 5% gets the 5% cache gets full, it'll start to eat into the other 5%. But 10% of the RAM on every box is going to go to distributed cache without you touching anything. Couple of things about that is it reads that at install time. So if the memory goes up or down in a box after install, the distributed cache doesn't get that memo, doesn't get the fax, doesn't get the phone call. It's going to keep taking the same amount of RAM. So if the memory goes up or down, you need to manually adjust the cache. Here's a fun fact. So you can do a couple of crazy things with the distributed cache. By default, it's turned on all your servers. For small farms, that's probably okay, but you can make a dedicated distributed cache server. You can shut it off on all your SharePoint servers. You can turn the distributed cache on just one server. Don't turn the other roles on. Don't turn on search or web front end or all that stuff, and then just dedicate a ton of RAM to it on that one box. You can actually give the distributed cache too much RAM. So you've got this thing that takes RAM to save things. You can actually give it too much RAM to the point where if you give it more than 16 gig of RAM, it actually runs more slowly. So as we've got our little bell curve thing where I want to make sure, like 1 gig of RAM's here and 30 gigs of RAM's here. The performance goes up like this till you hit 16 gig of RAM, and then it drops off. So what happens is, because this is cache and because there's a lot of processes that go through and take pieces out of the cache and write them to disk, and processes that go pull data off of disk and put it into cache and garbage collection and things like that, you can actually have too much RAM for the garbage collection to keep up with. And if you get more than 16 gig of RAM, which is 8 and 8, when it sees that 16.1 gig of RAM, it just throws up his hands and just says, I don't like this, I'm going to go sit in the corner. And so be careful of that. If you do dedicate a server, that you don't give it more than 16 gig of RAM on a box. When you sale your distributed cache, you can either do the dedicated server on that, or you can do the one where it's on all of the boxes. But the important thing is that if you have it on multiple servers, it works best if they're all using the same amount of RAM. So I have not done that. I can tell you I haven't been real good about that, but I haven't had any problems. But that's the recommendation, is that they all have the same. The other thing is everybody virtualizes servers these days. I know I virtualize servers. If you have a virtualized server that's running the distributed cache, don't have the physical RAM or the RAM of the box be dynamic, because the distributed cache needs to grab stuff quickly. There are some time limitations inside of the distributed cache, and if things don't happen quickly enough, it gets very upset. So, yeah, SP Jeff in the chat room is saying just to be safe, he's going to ask his server teams for 15.99 gig of RAM, just to be safe. Good idea. The one thing, Jeff, with that, and that brings up an interesting point. When you're dedicating RAM to a dedicated box, give a couple of gig, 2, 4 gig, whatever, of RAM to the OS, and then your 15.999 sits on top of that. So potentially you get a server with 18 gig of RAM, give 2.01 to the OS. And again, don't use dynamic RAM if you can avoid it. Another interesting thing is I've messed with this in highly secure environments, and here's one of these things. Man, do I hate this. I think of myself as a fairly security tolerant guy. I mean, I hate security things. I hate typing in my password, all that kind of stuff, but I understand why it's there, and I try not to whine about it too much. I try to be on the side of the security guys. But one thing I hate is environments where the security guy gets all excited about security and shuts off ping, blocks ping at the firewall or at the router, or I don't know, inspects every packet that comes across the wire and kills. I don't know how they do it, but they break ping. I hate it when they break ping. So the interesting thing is the distributed cache requires ping to work, because that's how nodes talk to the first node, the distributed cache cluster. So if you are in a highly secure environment and they lock ping down, first of all, throw a chair at them, but then tell them that they have to open it up, at least on your SharePoint boxes, because the distributed cache requires that. Interesting. So another thing is don't run it as a farm account, but you don't want to run anything as a farm account. Run that as your service account or dedicated account or something. I normally just run it as a service account. And finally, and this, oh my goodness, I've seen some servers die an ugly death because of this. The distributed cache, the app fabric, once you start seeing there be problems, one of the things that you can do is you can remove the distributed cache from a server. And that's sadly one of your best troubleshooting tips. Is if you've got a machine that's constantly having distributed cache problems, just remove it from the cluster, reboot it, rebuild it, do whatever, and then add it back in. So because this stuff sits in RAM, if you just shut it off, if you just remove it, you can lose things, and you can also get the machine in such a state that distributed cache just will not freaking work. It will just break. So there actually is a commandlet that you can use in PowerShell to gracefully shut down the service. So, and I didn't put the command in my notes, but you can gracefully shut down the app fabric, and then you have to wait 15 minutes, 15 minutes before you actually shut the box off or remove the distributed cache from that box. So you tell the distributed cache to gracefully shut down, then you walk away, go watch an episode of Archer or something like that, and then come back, and hopefully by then the distributed cache has pulled its claws out of SharePoint enough and has taken all the things that were in its distributed cache and either written them to disk or flushed them over to another distributed cache box. And then you can do the whole remove the distributed cache from your box. I've absolutely seen that blow a box up. I've actually, not get that. You can lose data, things like that. So be careful with that. So some folks in the chat room are discussing how this is kind of like the user profile service was in 2010. It is. I mean, it's the same kind of thing. I would say that it's less work to get running than the user profile service was, and it's maybe less fragile to keep running, but once it does break, it's tougher to troubleshoot, and you can actually kill your farm with it. Whereas you couldn't do that with user profile service. User profile service, if it made you mad, you could just remove it and recreate it. So, but that was it. So I hope, and I see some folks discussing stuff in the chat room. So if you've got questions about the distributed cache service, put them in the notes under the blog post for this, and I'll actually blog this one. Like to see what your comments are, but that comes up a lot. So hopefully that will help things. So Fabian in the chat room is asking, can you limit the memory allocation for the distributed cache? You absolutely have complete control over how much memory allocation the distributed cache uses. So again, there are some of those commandlets that come with SharePoint that will allow you to designate how much RAM each server uses, dedicates to the distributed cache. Yes. And for those of you that don't sit in the chat room, there's like a 10-second lag on the stream. So, you know, I say something 10 seconds later, the people in the chat room see it, and then they respond. So sometimes these questions get a little disjointed. But yes, you can tweak that. And again, you have to do that if you change the RAM on any of your boxes. So I didn't plan to spend quite so much time on that, but again, I've gotten multiple requests for that. So hopefully that helped fill in some blanks on why we have it, how to keep it from turning on you. But if you've got more questions, give me a shout and I'll answer them in another netcast. Another issue, and this was one that I actually got bit by my darn self this last week, and this is the idea that if you've got a SharePoint box that does not have outbound internet access, which from a secure standpoint, not a horrible idea, an incredible pain in the butt, but not a horrible idea. There are a couple of places in SharePoint that suffer because of that. So there any place where you can bolt things into SharePoint, I'm talking PowerShell and solutions and all that kind of stuff. Any of those, anytime you've got that, SharePoint goes out and tries to make sure that whatever that was signed with, whatever certificate that was signed with, has not been revoked. So it looks for a thing called the CRL, the Certificate Revocation List. Obviously, if the machine doesn't have internet access, that won't work. And so you'll see things like if you've got a machine that doesn't have internet access, PowerShell takes a long time to come up. STS-ADM takes a long time to run. And it's all because SharePoint is going out trying to talk to crl.microsoft.com, and it's waiting for it to time out, things like that. So I discovered a new way in this last week that was causing one of my customers' farms problem, and that's with the Secure Store service. So in the background, the Secure Store service does the same thing, and these boxes didn't have internet access, and the Secure Store service was actually failing out when I was setting the key for the Secure Store service. And discovered that, cranked up logging, did a bunch of things, and it was because the Secure Store service was trying to get to the certificate revocation list. It couldn't, it was timing out, and it was taking too long and things were breaking. So there's a few things that you can do. The way that I got most of my information on this, I again cranked up my logging in the ULS log, and found it that way. Also in the Windows event viewer, if you go not to the big three, system security and applications, but if you go down, not every, but many Microsoft applications have their own logging. The cryptography API, or CAPI2 as I like to call it, has its own entry in there, and so I went in there and turned on the CAPI2 auditing, and then I could see all the different things that were going out trying to hit crl.microsoft.com. And I've done a few things. I haven't followed up with the customer to make sure that everything's good to go, but there are a few things that with SharePoint 2010 that you could do to work on that there. And I did a group policy. I had to set a couple of group policy things that said don't check for this. Had to do a thing with the secure token service certificate, things like that. So kind of the takeaway from here is number one, that my phone is done charging. Number two is that if you've got SharePoint boxes that don't have internet access, be on the lookout for that. Be on the lookout for things about the CLR and not being able to go out, because it's going to bite you. I used to not deal with it. I used to just power through the stalling when PowerShell came up, but now I've gotten a little more religious about fixing that. So there's a couple things out there. I need to find some better resources, so I might next week follow up with this with some better resources, but I wanted to get this one in here. Next topic, as you guys are painfully aware, I talk about patching a lot on the Netcast, and this is just kind of a quick follow-up. Had somebody ask me last week, I think, what patch to install, new farm, all that kind of stuff, and then they asked me if slipstreaming those patches still worked. I said that I thought that it did, but I hadn't tested it lately, and so they followed up with me, and they confirmed that they had a brand new install, so they expanded it all, and they slipstreamed the March public update into RTM, and then they slipstreamed the October 2013 update into that, and SharePoint Server 2013 installed fine. So just kind of wanted to give you a heads up on that. Looks like that still works. SharePoint 2010, I know it broke a while back, and I thought the idea was it would be fixed to Service Pack 2, and now that I think about it, I haven't tested it since then. Because there was a couple of goof ups with the Service Pack 2 and all that. But slipstreaming looks like it still works for now. So this was a funny one. So a buddy of mine, Ellis Luboff, he's a SharePoint guy out in the Philly area, I think, sent me an email a couple of weeks ago talking about he's like, hey, I got this thing that I did in the last week. You should talk about it in your Netcast. I always dig ideas like that. That's why we talked about the distributed cache, all that kind of stuff. So I'm open to that. So I'm like, cool. And, Ellis is a good guy. Not gonna tell me dumb stuff. So it was about a problem, and I'll get into the meat of the problem later, that was fixed in the February 2011 cumulative update for SharePoint 2010. And he's like, had this problem, this patch had this, and this. I'm like, dude, what are you doing installing the February 2011 CU? It's almost 2014. What are you doing? He's like, no, dummy. I've had that patch installed for a couple of years now, but I just didn't know about this other piece of it. I'm like, oh, well, that makes way more sense then. That's a good topic. Let's talk about that. So what Ellis was talking about was the February 2011 CU broke workflows for some people. So like my buddy Mark Anderson was a guy that had some problems with this because he creates these really complicated workflows. So the March 2011 CU and onward puts a complexity limit on how complex workflows can get. And what had happened with Ellis is he had a farm that had that patch on, probably since it was responsible to put on, but now just recently had finally created workflows that were complex enough to trigger that, and it killed him. And so what he wanted me to talk about on the Netcast was just a couple of things, and really just some links to send to you guys in case you get this, is if you have a workflow that triggers this, you can go into the web app and you can tweak this complexity limit. You can increase it. So the idea is Microsoft doesn't want you writing a workflow that's so complicated that it kills the server. So put these limits in. So you can go into the web app level and tweak it to allow more complex workflows. But as Ellis discovered, that wasn't quite enough because there was also a timeout that was put into place. So he also had to go into the web config for his web app and increase this timeout because even though the complexity level was high enough, the timeout was not. So he just wanted me to bring that up in that cast. So I'm sorry, Ellis. I'm sorry. I thought you were installing a nearly 3-year-old patch on your server. It makes a whole lot more sense now that you and I talked it out. But if you do have complicated workflows in SharePoint 2010, if you're getting these weird errors, see if either one of those links, increasing the complexity of the timeout helps. Home stretch, folks. We're almost there. I wanted to talk about something. So a while back, I talked about how a free ebook had come out for Windows 8.1 from Microsoft. They've now come out with the Windows 2012 R2 free ebook. So you can go to the blogs.microsoft or msdn.com and get that. It's a technical overview, good fun read, free, but you can grab that, kind of get you up to speed on what's new in 2012 R2. This whole cloud thing, turns out that's got some traction. So if you're doing any kind of that, virtualization or any of those kind of things, 2012 R2 adds a whole bunch of great things for that. So check that ebook out for free. That was on me, folks. I paid for all of it. You might as well download it. Here's a thing. So many of you know, and I'll probably blog about this here in a couple of weeks. I recently switched over from my sad, pathetic Android phone to a cool, happy, hip Windows phone, the Lumia 920, and still in the honeymoon phase with that, so that's good. And one thing I love about this phone has nothing to do with the thing I'm going to talk about, but when you install GDR3, the preview, I think, it adds this thing called Glance, where even when the phone is like not on, it gives you the time so you don't have to turn it on. Oh man, I love that. I just pull it out of my pocket, look at the time, and you can tell it like it's at night. You can set the night times and say don't make it bright from 10 to, oh, love it. But anyway, moved to the Lumia 920 running Windows Phone 8, GDR3, whatever the thing is. Having a good time with it, loving it. This last weekend, I was reading online a sad, sad story of a poor, innocent teenage boy who had a Lumia phone, and he lost it at a theater. Probably out seeing something cool like Thor. Phone fell out of his pocket, and he knew what it was. He got home right after, like he was fiddling with it during the previews, like I hate it, and I want to throw stuff at him. And then he got home from the movie, and it was gone, and he knew it was at the theater. So he went back to the theater. It wasn't there. So he did a thing that I didn't know existed, but built in to Windows Phone is a Find My Phone feature. So if you go to windowsphone.com and you log in there with the account that your phone is connected to, and your name, when you click that and you drop it down, like the second drop down is Find My Phone. And built right in. Didn't do anything to set it up, it's just there. So you can do a bunch of stuff. You can say, hey, where's my phone? And it will find your phone. So that was pretty cool. So he knew where his phone was. The long sordid story, but his phone was not at the theater. Second thing that you can do is if it's not a nefarious thing, like you just can't find the damn thing, you can send it no matter what setting it's on, just ring and go crazy. So you can do that. I verified that worked, much to my poor innocent wife's chagrin. Phone just goes crazy, ringing and vibrating, brrr, all that kind of stuff. But the third thing that you can do that is super cool is you can put a message on the lock screen. So this guy realized that his phone had been, I don't want to say stolen, but had been taken. He could see where the phone was. It was not at a business. It was at somebody's residence. So he put a thing on there, and through Find My Phone, changed the lock screen to say, hey, person living at 123 Main Street, I know you've got my phone. Give me a call, no questions asked, I want my phone back. And he got his phone back. But it was all built into the OS, and I had no idea that existed until I heard about that. So if you've got a Windows Phone, don't think another thing about it because it's already there and it's already working. But if anything ever happens to your phone, like your kids put it in the freezer or something like that, you can go to that Find My Phone and find it. So that was pretty cool. One last Windows Phone tip. When we were testing the SharePoint.rackspace.com, we were looking at what things look like on different screens, and that reminded me that you can take screenshots with Windows Phone 8. So if you have a Windows Phone 8 phone, like my beloved Lumia 920 right here, if you hold down the Windows key and the power key, it just takes a screenshot. Whatever. So I was able to go to SharePoint.rackspace.com, take a screenshot, send it off to the design guys. It's a little clumsy in that it doesn't automatically save it to SkyDrive like it oughta. But when you go into your pictures, you can select it and then just say upload to SkyDrive, and poof, they show up. So that was pretty cool, built in. Now, what's unfortunate is if you have a Surface device, like these beautiful pieces of machinery here that you can't see, they also have screenshotting built in, completely different key sequence. So on Surfaces, it is Windows key and volume down. So that's all built in there. So I just wanted to bring that up in case you want to take screenshots with your phones. So in the chat room, folks are talking about it. And yeah, I think the Apple phones have that stuff built in as well, and you have to go through iCloud to do it. When I was on Android, I used a couple of different, I think I used one called Where's My Droid. And Where's My Droid was kind of cool in that you set up phrases. So I could text my phone a specific passphrase, and it would text me back its GPS location. I could text my phone other specific phrases, and it would do the whole thing where it turned all the noises on and did that kind of stuff. So they've all got it now. But Windows Phone was great because it's all built in. And So so the final thing that I wanted to talk about, and this is I get this way every year. I apologize in advance. It's getting to be that time, especially with some of the recent developments that have happened in the news. But I wanted to mention that for a lot of us that are in, if you're listening to this, you're probably a SharePoint person, probably gainfully employed, got a couple of phones like I do, and all that kind of stuff. Now is the time of year when I always think about charity. My whole desire to give ramps up, and so it's something that's easy to forget about. And for me, for whatever reason, it usually takes the holidays for me to go, oh yeah, I need to do more. So this is kind of my call to action, I guess, for whatever. But there, so there's this ridiculous typhoon that just took out half of the Philippines. I can't even begin to imagine the devastation there. So was watching it, sitting in my easy chair last Friday night eating a bowl of ice cream, watching this on the news, and the local weatherman was describing the eye of this storm, not the whole storm. The eye of the storm had winds at 195 mile an hour, sometimes a little faster, but 195 miles an hour. And the eye of the storm was 50 miles wide. So there was a 50-mile wide thing flying through the Philippines going 200 mile an hour. And that was just the middle. And there was, the rest of the typhoon off to the sides. And so they equated it to, around here we get tornadoes in Iowa. So it was like an F4 or an EF4 tornado. And around here, those things are like a half a mile wide. If one of those gets to a mile wide, it's the end of the world. This thing was 50 miles wide. 50 miles wide. And I was reading a newspaper article this weekend, and so they were talking about this, and they're like, well, not many structures in the Philippines were built to withstand that kind of wind. And I'm like, where are the buildings anywhere that are built to withstand 200-mile-an-hour winds 50 miles wide? So crazy stuff. So you can do Red Cross and all that kind of stuff for that. But this time of the year, since, I had kids a few years back and all that, Christmas and all that kind of stuff, Thanksgiving. So if you're inclined to it, if you've got a little bit left over or whatever, think about things like the Red Cross. Myself personally, one of my personal, the two, so I give to two main charities, and I don't, I hesitate to say this, but I don't like to give to the big encompassing things like United Way, Red Cross, and all that kind of stuff. And they've got important purposes, and I understand that. I'm not begrudging them, but for me, I know where I want my money to go, so I just give them my money or my stuff, whatever I'm doing. But for me, my two favorite charities are the Mid-Iowa Community Action. So it's basically the food pantry here, the local food pantry. And so every year I give them hundreds and hundreds of dollars in food and all that kind of stuff. But they also allow you to do things like adopt a family over Christmas. So my wife and I have adopted two families, and the families give you a Christmas list for all the people in the family and just go out and buy them stuff. And so we've been doing that for several years, and that just feels right. And it feels right, especially when the kids are asking for things like socks. I mean, I think about my kids, and they got way too many toys and just crap upon crap. Knowing that there are kids that live straight, right in the same town as me, that all they want for Christmas is socks because they don't have socks. So I like doing that and taking care of that. And then also another one of the charities that I give to is my high school has a foundation, apparently, for lack of a better word, where they give scholarships and all that kind of stuff. So I like to give them money to, I came from a small rural town. So the other one here that we've got in town is the Youth and Shelter Services, which is just for troubled kids, that kind of stuff. So I like to help them out. But whatever your particular thing is, people have, there are, like Susan G. Komen, the breast cancer stuff. There's all kinds of things. I guess my request is that if you've got the ability to do that now's a great time to do that, because getting to be that seasoned, like helping other people out. So I used to hit this up a lot more in earlier Netcast, but I felt like it was too preachy, so I kind of told myself I would only talk about it a couple of times over the holidays, and we're getting close to that. But again, if you can help somebody out, do whatever, make you feel good, you'll like it. All right, enough about that. Enough preaching by me. Shameless self-promotion. So as always, still got some copies of the SharePoint 2013 Professional Administration. I don't have one handy. Had somebody bought one just last week. I'll autograph it and all that kind of stuff. You can go to toddklindt.com/pro-sp2013admin, and you can get links to buy it on Kindle or Nook or whatever. Or if you live in the continental U.S., someplace I can afford to ship to, I will sign one and ship it to you right out of my basement. They're sitting right out there. The next thing going on is the SharePoint conference. I'm all registered for it, but Shane and I are doing a pre-conference session on installation, configuration, all that kind of stuff. The SharePoint conference itself is March 3rd through the 6th at the Venetian in Las Vegas, Nevada, or Nevada. And our pre-conference thing is March 2nd. So the conference itself is $2,000. Our session is an additional $400, but I promise Shane will do whatever. If you're having trouble making up for the money, Shane will do whatever, give hugs, carry your bags for you, whatever. We'll make it worth your time to come hang out with us. Any of you that have gone to our sessions before know they're pretty loose, pretty friendly, pretty open. We're going to be doing that same kind of thing. We're going to be walking through SharePoint 2013 installation, getting that all set up, and then showing you all the places that Shane screws it up when he installs. So that's a good one. The next month is SP TechCon. That's in San Francisco, so just next door to Las Vegas and up a little bit. That's April 22nd through the 25th. Also doing some sessions there. I don't think I have all those yet, but you can go to sptechcon.com and register for that. Get on that train. And then the next month is Microsoft Tech Ed. That's May 12th through the 15th, and that will be in Houston. And they just opened up registration for that, and you can sign up for that too. So a lot of stuff going on. So if you've got funds, want to do whatever, got some great conferences. Hopefully I'll be able to see you at one of them. And if you do come to any of those conferences, if Rackspace has a booth, for goodness sakes, come by and say hi. We'll be giving stuff away. If nothing else, free hugs. And if you stumble across me, by all means, come up, introduce yourself, tell me who you are. I'd love to meet you. I'd love to talk to you. I enjoy that kind of stuff. So by all means, swing by. So I made this horrendously long tonight. I apologize. But thanks, everybody. Chat room's been great. I'll be in the chat room for a few minutes after this before I go upstairs. But thanks to everybody. Netcast schedule might be a little flaky coming up. As some of you may know, my wife's pregnant. She's due soon. So depending on when that whole thing happens, one Monday night, you just might not hear anything from me. I just don't know. But for those of you that are in the chat room and all that if I just disappear, that might be it. So, but to everybody else, thanks. Have a good holiday, or Thanksgiving is coming up, and I'll see you next week. Thanks.